Hello and good evening. My name's Aaron Bastani. Welcome to this Monday's edition of TyskySour. I'm joined by Michael Walker. How you doing, Michael?
I'm very well. Pleasure to be here.
Michael's just had his third espresso, I think, over the last 30 minutes. So if he appears somewhat fidgety on camera, you know the reason why.
Well, I always worry about getting like brain fog about 40 minutes through. So I've started having a triple espresso before we go live.
Do you think brain fog's a real thing?
Yes.
You
don't think it is? You don't believe in that?
You can't be constantly at 100% nailing it all the time.
Oh, no. I think
that's just regular.
About 60% of the time I've got brain fog, but I just prefer not to have it when I'm live on YouTube.
Yeah, well.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I can hear us talking. Is that me? Am I hearing voices? It's going to be the first time. So we're talking about the resignation of Amber Rudd yesterday, the sensational resignation of Amber Rudd. She was replaced this morning by Sajid Javid. The big question is, does the Ruddslide stop there with will the Windrush scandal and the clear distaste the public now has for the hostile environment which characterises really the last 7 years of the government's policy around immigration now taint the Prime Minister and take her down too? We're going to start by going to a video which was really the catalyst for much of this. Of course, the story was broken by Amelia Gentleman, but in terms of the specifics of Amber Rudd's resignation, it all started really in a select committee where she was questioned by Yvette Cooper. So we're going to cut to that and see just how she misled Parliament.
Targets for removals, when were they set? We don't have targets for removals. But you did? I don't know what are you referring to?
We've just heard from a previous evidence that the Home Office and there are regional targets for net removals.
Yeah, that's bad, huh? That's bad. And she was really caught out because we know as of yesterday evening, there was an article out from The Guardian, if we can just pull that up, revealing a letter from January 2017 highlighting Amber Rudd's full recognition, understanding, knowledge of the fact that there were targets, because that letter is sent to Theresa May and it's signed by Amber Rudd discussing them. So, Michael, what do you make of this? What's going on?
Well, first of all, fair play to whoever leaked it in the Home Office, because the staggering in which they did it was worthy of Labour backbenchers trying to take down their leader. So they started off, they didn't just leak it all in one go. They started off by leaking an email that Amber Rudd had been CC'd into, which said that there were targets, which contradicted what she said in the Home Affairs Select Committee. Then she could say, oh, sorry, I didn't read the email. Busy job. Then 3 days later, they release an email which she has signed personally to the Prime Minister, which says these targets exist. And she didn't need to tell the Prime Minister these targets exist. The Prime Minister already knew. But said, we are going to increase the target by 10%. So that's blatant evidence that she was lying, released slowly over a 5-day period.
And what's interesting is this is contempt of Parliament. So she was lying to Parliament. It's constitutional convention that when you do that, you have to resign. So even though these people are very shameless, they don't really care about the rules very often. In this instance, she had to go. And it's not the first time that Amber Rudd has broken the law. I was on Sky News yesterday. I said we have a Home Secretary who breaks the law, a Foreign Secretary who can't do diplomacy, and a Prime Minister who can't run a bath. And there was a great soundbite. Also true. In 2016, there was an Afghan man who was sent back to Kabul by Amber Rudd as Home Secretary. There were 3 High Court judges that said that was illegal. He had the right to remain, that his life was in danger in Kabul. Fortunately, he was brought back. He's now safe. He lives here. But she was found to be in contempt of court. So if you or I are in contempt of court as political commentators, as journalists, the media would say, especially the right-wing media, these people are criminals. They don't care about our way of life. They hate Britain. They hate our justice system. We have a Home Secretary who was in contempt of court. But as of yesterday, not just that, also contempt of Parliament. I mean, it's pretty remarkable that you have a Home Secretary who would so brazenly flout the law. But it's not just limited to Amber Rudd, because Theresa May has repeatedly been subject to the same issues. We've now got a Home Office which is at odds with the law, is at odds with judges. We saw it in 2011 when Theresa May lied about, as we talked about in the last TyskySour, undocumented migrant being able to stay here simply because he owned a pet cat. I mean, of course, the right-wing media lapped this up. 2013, she was found to have sent 48,000 Tier 4 students away illegally. They were deported incorrectly. So repeatedly, we're finding the Tories, this nexus of Amber Rudd and Theresa May at the Home Office, breaking the rules. So the question for you is, Michael,
Yep.
what's next?
What's next? Well, Theresa May has been very careful to try and distance herself from the reason for which Rudd resigned. So she was asked today, should you hold some responsibility considering that you designed the hostile environment policy and that's what Amber Rudd has had to resign for? Theresa May is trying to be very clear in saying, no. Amber Rudd has not resigned because of the hostile environment policy. She's resigned because of a very specific mistake she made, which was to lie in front of Parliament, which Theresa May is hoping won't come back to her. We'll analyse that in a second, but first we're going to watch that section of the interview, if we can get that up now. So
Did you know about the targets, and shouldn't you be taking some personal responsibility for this?
Well, first of all, if when I was Home Secretary, yes, there were targets in terms of removing people from the country who are here illegally. This is important. I think if you talk to members of the public, they want to ensure that we are dealing with people who are here illegally. And I think it's only fair, not just on hard-working taxpayers, on those people who've come here legally, who are actually contributing to our society, that those who are here illegally are not able to carry on being here. That's what the government is doing. I think dealing with illegal immigration is very important.
But shouldn't you be taking personal responsibility, not Amber Rudd? This is your hostile environment.
Amber Rudd was very clear about the reasons why she has resigned. That was because of information that she gave to the House of Commons that was not correct. If you look at what we're doing as a government and have been doing over the years as a government, what we are doing is responding to the need that people see for a government to deal with illegal immigration. That's exactly what we...
So there's two issues there. The first is that I personally think Amber Rudd should have been forced to resign because of the hostile environment policy. Yes, she lied to Parliament, which, as you say, Constitutional Convention suggests you should resign for. But also she was in charge of a policy which stripped British citizens of their right to housing, jobs, healthcare, and stop people who'd been on trips returning to their own country. So for me, that should be a resignable offence.
And this, by the way,
anyway.
This could just be the tip of the iceberg, right? Amelia Gentleman broke the story in regard to Windrush people in particular, i.e. the children of West Indian immigrants from the early 1950s. It's clearly going to be a lot more than just them. So we could be talking thousands of people who are here legally, just as British as you or I, like you say, being deported, being detained. And you have to think, if this was thousands of people with blonde hair and blue eyes, I think this would have led to Amber Rudd resigning long before yesterday evening.
Mm-hmm. But even beyond that ethical point, even beyond the idea that I think it should be a resignable offence to strip British citizens of their rights as British citizens.
Even one, right?
What Theresa May is hoping is that she can say, this is actually a technicality. Amber Rudd has resigned because of her misleading Parliament or her giving false information on Wednesday. Theresa May hasn't given false information to Parliament. But Theresa May presumably watched that Home Affairs Select Committee, or at least saw the news afterwards. She knew Amber Rudd was lying, and we know that she knew Amber Rudd was lying because of that email, because that letter she sent to Amber Rudd that said, I'm going to increase the target for deporting people.
That's right.
And also Theresa May, in that same interview, that I think we saw it there, said that there was a target for removals in the Home Office when she was there. So she's known for 4 days that this whole thing is a sham, that Amber Rudd had lied and should resign. But she's hoping that it will just blow over.
And the most important thing is that Amber Rudd was tweeting on Friday evening that this was just a sort of error. Even then, Theresa May would have known that this was a clear lie, and yet she did nothing. Here's a question for you. Is she not engaging with that issue because she doesn't want to, or because actually journalists aren't really asking it? It doesn't feel to me that anybody's pressing Theresa May's knowledge of the facts in regard to Amber Rudd and her lying, misinforming Parliament as much as they should be. What do you think?
Well, it's difficult to disagree. So, I mean, in that interview, at least he did push the idea that this should be her own personal responsibility. But, I mean, there could have been a gotcha...
But not the issue, right, of her knowing that Amber Rudd herself was lying, right?
Yeah, well, because there also could have been a gotcha moment, because in that very same interview, she said there were targets when I was in the Home Office. So if you say at that point, so there were targets when you were in the Home Office, you just admitted that to me. Amber Rudd said on Wednesday there weren't. Did you know she was lying on Wednesday? Because it's going to be very difficult for Theresa May to say she didn't know she was lying on Wednesday. And it's all the facts are out and available to see that Theresa May was willing to mislead Parliament, willing to mislead the public until it was no longer tenable to do so. Also, what people were reporting this morning is that the reason Amber Rudd resigned was because she personally wanted to. She didn't feel like she could go on as all this information was coming out, which showed that she had been incompetent at her job, essentially. So Theresa May would have been happy to keep the sham going if she could have done. And she should be pushed on that.
So let's talk about the hostile environment. You've made a point about how you think it's bigger than just quote-unquote anxiety. I mean, the hostile environment has broken individuals and families. It's meant people couldn't access healthcare. I mean, clearly people have died as a result from it. There was one gentleman, West Indian heritage, who couldn't, I think, access treatment in regard to his cancer, was sent away. Clearly there will have been people, we know that stress can induce all manner of conditions, especially as you get older, who have probably suffered fatally as a result of this. What does it say to you when there are Tories who go on the Marr Show or Newsnight or BBC Question Time and they go, we get it. We got it wrong. This has created huge amounts of anxiety. And it's like, well, actually, you've probably indirectly killed people. Do you feel that Tories, in responding to this stuff, actually get the magnitude of what they've done? Do you feel like their contrition is genuine?
Before I answer, I want to jump to the next video, which is Theresa May using that term, so we can see her sort of like minimising this issue in that same interview. Can we get that up, Gary, before I answer?
We have seen the Windrush generation being caught up in a way that has caused anxiety among that generation. That's why we have set up a unit which is helping those people. It's helping those people to get the documents that they need. They are British. They are part of us.
I mean, I think it's shameless and also deeply patronising, the idea that it wasn't actually the policy that was a problem. It was people's understanding of the problem. So yeah, the hostile environment made sense. It was popular. The public want us to get rid of illegal immigrants. But obviously it's caused some anxiety. And what we need to do is communicate the policy better. I mean, there was no problem with the communication. There were people who left the country and couldn't return and missed their families' funerals. There were people who couldn't...
Weddings, all sorts, right?
Who couldn't get cancer treatment because they were denied treatment by the NHS. People who lost their homes and their jobs. That's not anxiety. I mean, not to downplay the anxiety that this has caused, but those are material consequences and the designed consequences of a policy she created. So to say it's about anxiety is just outrageous. It's also very common in current politics when politicians have sort of been shown to have failed, that they sort of blame it on communication. So with the Brexit vote, it's people who feel left behind by globalisation. But it's not a communication issue. It's people who look around their community and have recognised that 30 years of neoliberalism have stripped industry from that area, that 10 years of austerity have stripped the services from that area, and their local economy is crumbling. There's no jobs for them. That's not feeling left behind. That's being screwed over by a particular form of globalisation. And yeah, it doesn't cut it to say, oh, they feel left behind. Oh, they've felt anxious. No, they've suffered the consequences of the policies that you've implemented, and it's time you took some responsibility.
I mean, anxiety is something, if somebody drinks as much coffee as you have in the last half hour, that's anxiety, right? Having your life destroyed is not anxiety. It's having your life destroyed.
You don't take away someone's home and then give them beta blockers.
Right, that's precisely right. I mean, it would sort of cohere with this government's approach to austerity, declining living standards, falling wages, and then mental health. And they would say, yes, we really have to take, account of, we'll ensure that everybody involved has access to counselling and mental health services. Well, okay, great, sure. Probably more important that you give them citizenship, you bring everybody back, you give them some form of compensation. I mean, I'd imagine quite a significant amount of money. I mean, that's the sort of level of political conversation we need to be talking about rather than I'm listening, because I'm listening is not going to cut it.
I mean, it's even worse than that, because it's not they say, one, we're going to take away your livelihoods and then we're going to give you counselling, because they're not even offering the counselling. They haven't fully funded mental health services. It's all about parity of esteem. Yeah. So it's the idea, we're going to take away your home, and then if you feel bad or get depressed, that's okay. Don't feel ashamed. We as a society recognise that mental health is a serious issue.
It exists.
Let's talk about it. You shouldn't feel ashamed. But we're not going to give you counselling because we can't afford that. We're not going to give you a home because we don't want to pay for that. But it's well, I don't want to say it's like identity politics, because that's sort of like a overly... It's very, let's say it's sort of like a neoliberal idea where it's sort of like, we'll destroy your life and then tell you not to feel bad about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it's instrumentalizing some aspects of left politics for a certain rhetoric. I think Michael is incredibly pale all of a sudden.
Yeah, we've lost
You need to
something
get-
that covers
you
up.
You need to
light.
get back in the tanning salon, right? Michael Walker needs to get back in the tanning salon. You need to use have you still got any tokens left from your time in the tanning salon? recently?
You know, it ran out. I had 12 months to use 60 minutes, and I ran out without
60
using any of it.
minutes.
Well, I got worried about cancer for a while.
But I was going to say, you can do maybe you could do we could do a focus on melanoma or something if you fucking use
It'd be
it for
useful
60
for me, yeah. I could
Right.
do one of those like BBC freestyle documentaries where I sort of go around to tanning beds asking kind of naive questions.
I can see you doing that.
Yeah.
I can see you doing that. I mean, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to get skin cancer, Michael. I'm glad you didn't actually get back on the sunbed. I think, look, the situation we've got where the light's been covered up a bit more, vastly preferable to you getting skin cancer. Anyway, this issue of deportations and, a very, very iron-fisted approach to undocumented and documented migration also bleeds into what we've seen with Europeans. So analysis of government data shows deportations of EU citizens are at the highest levels since records began. 5,300 EU nationals removed during the year ending June 2017, an increase of 20%. More broadly, the number of EU citizens detained has increased sixfold, that's 600%, since 2009. So one can't help but feel, whether it's Brits who are just as British as you or I, who should be here, and are being sent to Jamaica or Barbados, or whether it's EU immigrants who, because we're still in the single market, still in the EU, are also legally here, are being sent back. One can't help but feel that the target approach has led to a massive historic level of injustice. For EU deportations to increase sixfold since really the Tories came into power, that's since 2009, so it was a year later, strikes me as absolutely remarkable. And it's inextricable from what we saw in 2011 with the racist van telling people to go home. And maybe we can talk about this a bit more. We're at a moment where people now, some in Labour too, let's be real, are saying we need to distinguish between good migrants, bad migrants, documented, undocumented. When you look at the fact that EU citizens being deported have gone up 600%, when you look at the fact that Brits who were legally here, should be here, were sent back potentially in their thousands, this is not an issue about how the hostile environment was inappropriate for illegal immigration or undocumented immigration. It's clearly had profound consequences for people who, whatever your thoughts about whether they should be here or not, were legally entitled to be here. So what are your thoughts around that moving forward? Because we've seen certain Labour politicians adopting the same rhetoric of good and bad migration, legal, illegal. To what extent do we need to ditch this whole rhetoric around the hostile environment, this whole policy environment, because it's also harming pretty much everybody?
Well, I think there's two things. First of all, I assume, and I haven't looked too deeply into the exact reasons that EU migrants are getting deported, but it's often to do with homelessness, right?
Yeah.
So this might be one of the cases where targets in one sector of the state are helping people achieve targets in another. So if you've got the Housing Advice Service and the Job Centre, they're constantly trying to remove people's recourse to public funds. That gets them on the street, and then that means that the Home Office can improve its targets for deporting those people. It's like, I'm going to do a James Butler now and quote a theorist of neoliberalism, or Quant, who says that you decrease the right... Oh, actually, which arm of it? I knew I'd do that. The moment I quote a theorist, the left arm of the state is the friendly one. The right arm is the brutal one. So you take away people's recourse to public funds. And what that means is you have to increase funding into the policing of people. And that's why we're deporting more EU migrants, because we're not giving them the funding they need to start lives with homes and jobs. In terms of how do we deal with, or discursively, what should be the positive position with regards the hostile environment is, yes, I think 100% we should be saying, at minimum, Labour at this point should be saying the hostile environment has not worked. I think it is quite clear that they haven't quite sorted out their line on this. So Diane Abbott this morning on GMB didn't seem to know exactly what Labour's brief was. She said, she was asked a lot about targets, and she said they're going to have targets, but it's only going to be for prisoners to be deported, which kind of just confused the debate because...
I mean, why would you have targets around this stuff? It's like saying, next year, we're going to expel 20,000 kids from school.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, you wouldn't expel any.
Yeah.
I mean, surely it's contingent on how many kids deserve to be expelled. It doesn't make any sense. It's not like saying we want X number of people to pass their GCSEs or get into social housing or to get out of poverty. It makes no sense to me. It's not something you can really measure.
So at the minimum, you say we're not going to have targets. We're going to do this on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
Because it's very easy to understand as the public how targets create bad incentives. So if you have a target, then there's a clear incentive for a person in a particular department to find someone liable to be deported to tick a box.
Right.
People understand that.
And also to reject the repeal, right?
Yeah. So it should be popular to get rid of targets. At the maximum of what would be politically possible at this moment in time would be some form of amnesty. It seems quite clear that Labour don't want to go down that route, and I can see why, because they feel like they've got the Tories on the defensive, and if they were to sort of if they were to commit to that, there'd be an obvious attack line for the Tories. I know some people would like them to take that policy, and I can see why it would make sense to go on the offensive at this point. If this was an economic issue, it probably would be the moment where Labour would go on the offensive and try and shift the narrative. For whatever reason, they're not doing that. So the intermediary position, the position that's easy to argue, that I don't think Labour have quite articulated yet, is that, yes, there will be deportations in a society where we don't have open borders and where we don't have amnesties for people who don't have documentation. But any policy which we have to identify people without documentation, if, as a byproduct of that policy, we end up ruining the lives of people who do have the right to be here, and if it goes against other objectives that the government has, then that's not a good policy. So the hostile environment, they say, yes, the aim of trying to reduce the number of undocumented people in Britain, I mean, I don't back this as a policy, but this is going to be Labour's position, is one we agree with. But if the policy to achieve that turns our teachers into border guards, which makes them worse teachers, if our policy to achieve that is to make doctors border guards, which makes their job more difficult.
As is currently the case.
And if the policy to achieve that means that people who've been living here for 40 years and have every right to be British citizens end up not being able to return to the country and being kicked out of their homes, then that's clearly, from a technocratic perspective, a very bad policy. So that should be their opposition to the hostile environment.
I mean, if you look at, for instance, incarceration rates, what reasonable society would say, we want to imprison, we want to incarcerate 20,000 more people a year? Because then clearly courts would be prejudiced when dealing with people facing criminal charges, right? So clearly if you've got people who are appealing, whether, if they're allowed to be here or not, let's say they're an undocumented migrant and they're making an appeal, they have a loved one here or whatever, and the appeal is rejected, it's clearly been rejected in many instances over the course of the last 7 years because of pursuing targets. And it's bled into elsewhere. We've already talked about briefly increase in, EU homelessness, meaning that many more of them are deported. Those 48,000 students who were on Tier 4 visas being sent back, this is...
Your mics won't pick it up.
Is it?
Aaron's been distracted by some very noisy people in the corridor.
Is it the corridor or?
Yeah, it's the corridor.
Well, look, you need to go to novaramedia.com, support.novaramedia.com, so we can soundproof the studio, okay? It's hugely important to me because, when I'm so eagle-eyed on Michael Walker's, tanned visage, his great Novara Media merch. By the way, go to shop.novaramedia.com. You can get this T-shirt there.
It's very comfy.
Actually, if you just pull up the laptop, Michael.
Yep.
You've got your sticker.
I've got my sticker, yeah.
He's got his great sticker. This guy's like product placement. Yeah. I mean, we couldn't ask for more from Michael Walker. Go to support.novaramedia.com. Go to shop.novaramedia.com. So pursuing targets, clearly that was one of the reasons why 48,000 students were deported. Wrongly. And I think today, Sajid Javid talked about the move from a hostile environment to a compliant environment. It's very, very managerial.
Very Orwellian, that, isn't it?
Oh, my God. Clearly, the whole thing needs to be thrown out. You would not have targets to incarcerate people. Like you say, it creates the completely wrong incentives. In the US, you have a privatized prison system. I remember a case, you can go Google this, check it out. There was a case of a judge who had shares in a company which was involved in privatizing, prisons in the state where he was a judge. So he had massive incentives to lock as many people up as possible. We don't want that kind of society. What's more, it's not commensurate really with justice, which is meant to be about impartiality and an appropriate sentence for what somebody has done. So yes, couldn't agree more. I think we're always going to have forms of deportation, even for the no borders people. What would you do with General Pinochet, right? Surely. in 1998 or whatever it was, you would have given him back to Chile, or you would have sent him to The Hague for...
Oh, but that's an extradition. That's different.
A war crimes tribunal. But the point is, you'll always have people that will be sent to other countries in regard to issues of legal scrutiny or punishment. You will do.
I'm not sure they're commensurable situations.
Well, no, I'm giving an extreme example because you will have people that will say, well, this is just terrible, we could never have it. Well, you clearly would understand, even if you...
I mean, it's a coherent position to say, I'm no borders, but I'm for extradition if a government whose legal system we recognise... Because then you're not deporting the person, you're delivering the person to someone else's criminal justice system.
Well, there's quite a permeable line between extradition and deportation, right? It just depends on what's happened. Often. Doesn't it?
Well, it's
if somebody's broken the law in a foreign country and you send them back, that's an extradition. If they've broken the law here and you send them back, it's deportation. But fundamentally, it's about abiding by the same values.
Yeah, but is it your law or is it their law?
Well, clearly, Michael, we're operating on the idea that, it's like, woke law.
I'm not really advocating for no borders anyway, but I think it's a coherent position to be for no borders and extraditing General Pinochet.
Well, I don't think most people that say this stuff don't get that far, but I agree with you. But no, clearly we would have this stuff going on, right? I mean, clearly, people are going to break the law in a number of countries, and countries should collaborate in upholding human rights and doing this stuff. So we agree on that. Anyway.
But the tougher position for the Labour Party is that they are going to they're not for no borders.
No, they're not.
So they need a policy which is very difficult to do, which sort of squares a humane migration policy which doesn't sort of make people's lives miserable, and one which doesn't advocate for no borders. I think a
very good place to start, I think, is getting rid of these targets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? We're agreed on that. Good. So let's move on. I think it's really important to say that we can't really distinguish between what's going on here, the hostile environment, these poor people being sent back, quote unquote, to the West Indies, these students being sent back, these 48,000 students who are on Tier 4 visas, these EU nationals being deported primarily because they were rough sleepers or had broken the law. I don't think you can draw a line between that and what we've seen in recent years, which is a tendency towards extrajudicial killings abroad of US nationals and people being stripped of their nationality. Now, this is particularly relevant in regard to, for instance, ISIS. So Brits will be born here, they're British people. They'll go to Syria, they'll fight with ISIS, and then the British government, and it's a very popular position, will say, well, we're now going to withdraw their citizenship. We're going to make them stateless individuals. And the media laps it up, and actually, sadly, much of the public laps it up. But we've got to understand that the state cannot have the power to withdraw citizenship from certain persons. This is a very dangerous route to go down. And I want to highlight the issue of, the case rather, of two Yemeni-based American citizens, Anwar al-Awlaki and Samir Khan. Gary, if you can pull this up, I think it's from the BBC. They were both killed by a drone strike in 2011. Barack Obama signed this off. Now, these were American citizens who were killed without a trial, without a judge, without a jury. So you've gone straight to the electric chair, metaphorically, without any kind of due process or rule of law. Anwar al-Awlaki was born in New Mexico. He is just as American as Barack Obama. And actually, tragically, the following month, his son was killed by mistake in another US drone strike. Maybe we get this picture up. This is a young kid. He was 16 years old, an American national. And then I think a year later, his sister, an 8-year-old child, again, an American national, was killed. Gorgeous little girl. If you go to Google, Anwar al-Awlaki, 8-year-old child, it's in The Guardian, it's in The Nation, this happened. 8-year-old child, an American national, was killed by a US drone strike. And there is we have to understand here, there's a spectrum in terms of how we understand the law, how we understand citizenship, how we understand race, how we understand immigration. It's all interconnected. And it's really well understood. Talking about theorists, Michael, Giorgio Agamben, the state of exception.
Oh, you've gone too far for me now, Aaron.
Well, the idea...
I'll do a quant. Agamben over my head.
The idea that the state can withdraw citizenship from an individual, no matter how reprehensible you find them, is a very, very, very dangerous road to go down. It's very new. Like I say, these drone strikes from 2011. It's become pertinent in the UK, really, with the emergence of ISIS. You know, there was a Tory minister openly talking about how hundreds of British-based jihadists are no longer citizens. They can't come back. Hundreds of people. So let's sort of speculate in the future what similar situations could arise. I mean, you can imagine that being extended, for instance, to British nationals going to fight for the YPG. Could they have their citizenship removed? Could they be killed without trial? Could they be killed without a judge or jury? It's a very, very dangerous road, and I think really this is something to impress on the viewers. What's going on with the hostile environment and the domestic context shouldn't be seen as distinct from foreign policy, which increasingly is detaching itself from the rule of law.
I was just imagining that if this was a couple of years ago and Corbyn, when he was a bit better at throwing away sort of like a media opportunity, he's got this moment where the Tories are really on the rocks. There's a very popular group of people, the Windrush generation, who've been fucked over by government policy. I imagine him saying, you know what we need to also think about? The rights of ISIS. And then all the political capital which has accrued over the previous 2 weeks just
Well,
suddenly disintegrate.
this is why I mentioned an 8-year-old girl being killed in a drone strike. Beautiful little girl, because that's the point. I mean, it again, justice is meant to be blind. It shouldn't matter. That's the point of the rule of law. You know, I know it's very emotive. I don't like ISIS. I'm not a fan. Yes, they should all be tried. Yes, they should all, be dealt with adequately. But you can't murder people without a trial, without a jury, because as a principle, this is the basis. We talk about Western values. That's it. I mean, there are none without that anyway. And by the way, this isn't just confined to the West. The rule of law and human rights and the idea that all people deserve a trial, it's a very broadly understood concept.
It's the attitude of act first, see if it's legal later, right?
Right.
So that was specifically Theresa May's line, which is deport first, appeal later.
Yeah. Which is just barbaric.
Kill them by drone first, work out if it's legal after.
Which is actually, there was an Ayatollah during the Iranian Revolution. There was an Ayatollah who was put in charge of the sort of the revolutionary courts, they were called. And he had a sort of Robespierre mindset. And there's the story of a young boy, I think he was maybe 11, 12, and he was on trial, and he was sentenced to death. And the Ayatollah said, people say, Bastari's orientalising, he's being racist towards Muslims, I'm half Iranian. I don't think we should intervene in Iran. I think the Iranian Revolution has a number of positive aspects to it, expelling various imperialist powers, etc., etc. But clearly this is indefensible. He says to this boy, well, if you're innocent, you'll go to heaven. And if you're guilty, it's the right thing to do. It's kind of what Theresa May is saying, right? If you're innocent, you'll be found innocent on appeal in Jamaica, and if you're not, well, then you can't come back anyway. This is not how the law operates. This is how tyranny operates. Anyway, let's move on. Sajid Javid has replaced Amber Rudd. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's turned into a good PR move for Theresa May. I was watching BBC News today, which led on the fact that he was the first BME person in a major office of state. Well, it's major office, one of the big four anyway, so Prime
Great
Minister,
office
Home
of State, yeah.
Great office of state, that's it. And that this was a good end to the crisis because he'd understand the plight of migrants because his parents were migrants. So in terms of PR, it's done quite well. And people seem quite happy to go along with this particular line of thinking, even though his voting on issues of migration and issues of migrant rights leaves much to be desired. Well, it's the same as the rest of the Tory cabinet. In terms of him personally, he seems like a fairly unremarkable guy. I mean, he's on the Tory right. He was a banker. He voted Remain, but has now gone kind of into the Leave camp. He was tweeting a while ago about how we need to leave the customs union. Very strong on that, whereas Amber Rudd was wavering a little bit.
He's kind of like a hard Brexit guy now, right?
He's a bit of a hard Brexit.
He says the customs union's not possible, the single market's not possible. We need to be able to walk away from any deal.
And in a kind of Adam Smith Institute kind of way.
Yeah.
So his two heroes are Margaret Thatcher and Ayn Rand.
Right.
So I think he'd probably be the bargain basement Britain kind of guy. On his previous brief, he was in charge of communities. So it was under his watch that the promise was broken to house all Grenfell families within a year.
And of course, he's the former managing director of Deutsche Bank, which goes to show that, multi-millionaires, even from ethnic minority backgrounds, who are willing to pursue a degenerate agenda of reactionary politics and hitting the poorest and most vulnerable hardest, even they can ascend to the very highest ranks of the Conservative Party. So, something to think about. So what do you think about the response generally about this? I mean, first of all, he's not the first BAME person to hold a great office of state. You've got Benjamin Disraeli about 150 years ago was Chancellor of the Exchequer, then the Prime Minister. He was Jewish, Disraeli of Israel, okay, Sephardic Jewish. We've had Michael,
David Miliband?
David Miliband. We had Malcolm Rifkind coming from sort of the head Jewish heritage. I mean, that technically falls into a BAME category. But what do you feel about this? 'Cause my instincts are brown faces in high places isn't really isn't what it's about. If it means that a racist system endures.
In a way, I feel like I'm not in a position to have particularly strong feelings. I mean, I don't feel any warmth.
It's not the solution to...
I don't feel any warmth towards Sajid Javid. I mean, he's a Tory Home Secretary, and I'm sure he'll be as awful at it as Amber Rudd was. I would like to see him removed as Home Secretary. But I mean, there was quite a nice quote today where Diane Abbott was interviewed about this, and she was saying, well, obviously, I'll disagree with all his policies and blah, blah, blah. But it is quite nice that on the dispatch box, at the dispatch box in the Home Office debates or whatever, there'll be two people who were both children of immigrants debating each other. So, I mean, she could recognise that sort of like, we don't have to...
So what you're saying is, if border force, if we've got 50% gender balance with our border guards and they go on pride marches and, there's 25% BAME border guards, that's a good thing.
No,
or sometimes an institution and somebody is just bad, right?
No, but Aaron, there's a difference between saying... There's a difference between saying, oh, it's all great because the guy's BAME, and it's completely irrelevant that there's the first BAME person who's...
But you're not thinner. The point is somebody like that can be instrumentalised in very specific ways to actually oversee and lead on very racist policies.
Yeah, so there's that issue. And I think that's what Theresa May's hoping, is that this will take some of the pressure off if she continues with a hostile environment policy, because it's a hostile environment policy with the face of someone who... It looks less racist when it's done by a BAME person, basically.
It's true, right?
Yeah. And to that degree, yeah, I mean, if it's being instrumentalised, that's a problem. I mean, I'm sure any Tory who's in the Home Secretary office with Theresa May as Prime Minister is going to be making the lives of people who look like migrants, look like they could be migrants, which was the effects of the hostile environment policy, miserable. And I don't have a strong opinion on whether or not they're BAME.
I mean, I do, because I think this whole thing about pulling the ladder up amongst some minorities is a thing. And if you're talking about a left hegemony, clearly it's contingent on mobilising an increasingly large part of the population, which is people from ethnic minorities. And that is something you do have to, I think, counteract. This idea that all of a sudden, if we did, he might be the next Tory Prime Minister. The point is, it doesn't matter. If he's overseeing policies which are racist and which single out and hurt people of colour the most, actually, like I say, that can be a net negative because it allows him to get away with more. Just a thought. I don't think, for instance, Barack Obama is a great example. We were just talking about the drone strikes killing Americans without a judge or a jury. The fact that he can sort of, sing along to Marvin Gaye at the White House Correspondents' Dinner and play basketball. I think, yes, it can actually... We have to understand the establishment media in this country, to a large extent, if we're talking about the BBC as well, is liberal, which is to say that they're socially liberal, they're economically liberal. And I think that kind of way of masking your politics is very effective. What's more, I imagine it's the first of many hires in this regard. I think if we're going to see Britain's policy in regards to migration, in regards to the economy, in regards to housing, become increasingly racialised, I would, by extension, expect to see that administered increasingly by brown or black faces. Otherwise, you don't get the consent, right? So I think it's something to think about, and I would disagree with you about not being nonplussed either way.
I suppose all I'm saying is that it's the argument, because the same thing happens with gay people in public life. So it's the idea that it's pinkwashing, isn't it? So the idea that sort of like capitalism tries to use gay faces to sell stuff to make themselves seem modern and blah, 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 blah. And I always used to get frustrated at sort of like queer studies things at university, because there was this implication that sort of like gay people should be inherently anti-capitalist and anti-establishment, but they've been sort of like incorporated into the system and sort of like they've got some kind of false consciousness now, and they're selling sort of like an oppressive system which fundamentally actually hates gay people. But
it is a bit different, isn't it? I mean, Bangladeshi's rate of unemployment in this country, Bangladeshi men rate of unemployment, is very, very high compared to white people there's clearly a material basis to race, which you can't really apply to whether or not you're gay or straight. I mean, I don't know the data in regards to GDP per head for gay or straight, but I think there's a clear material basis for looking at race and the state apparatus in a quite different way, no?
I mean, you could do. I just feel it's not my place to have a critique of the Home Secretary for being BAME. Do you know what I mean?
We'll leave it to Ash. We'll leave it to Ash and me.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah,
and we'll do it.
Well, also, I think the position of the left is not to sort of, well, what I think is a sensible position for the left is to sort of kind of mock it when sort of like the media do an uncritically celebratory idea that, yay, there's a brown person who's a Home Secretary, and sort of like miss the point of the countless brown people they'll be oppressing with their policies.
But it's like the
But
same.
at the same time, it's not if they say, yeah, but all things equal, all other things equal, is it good that there's gender balance in the Tory party? It's like, fine, yeah, sure, it's good.
I mean,
it's not. But if they say all things equal, would it be good if the Tory party were representative of the different ethnic minorities in Britain? Fine. All things equal, but it's not the most interesting conversation.
We're going to finish it here. No, I think it is very.
Party.
No, I think the specifics of a brown person overseeing a racist immigration possible actually is very pertinent. This is not a side comment. We're not saying it'd be great to have more women in Parliament. I think there's a very, very, very clear instrumental rationality about having an Asian man as the Home Secretary at this precise moment. We'll leave it there. Consequences for Labour. There's been a bit of disagreement about this, hasn't there? So some people have been keen to big up Yvette Cooper, saying that, you know, if she was the leader of the Labour Party, according to election guru Tim Farron, Labour would be 20% ahead. He tweeted. I thought John Stone, European correspondent for The Independent, had a good reply, highlighting that Yvette Cooper was as implicated in the hostile environment as much as any other Labour politician. What would you say to that? It seems that almost both are right to an extent. Now, Yvette Cooper did catalyse what happened in that select committee, but she also really oversaw quite a similar agenda, and she agreed with much of it as Shadow Home Secretary.
I mean, Yvette Cooper is quite an effective parliamentarian, and this was always the case when Jeremy Corbyn first became leader of the opposition. They weren't that practiced in sort of like forensic questioning. And people like Yvette Cooper, who've been basically trained and groomed to sort of like have a front bench career, they're very good at it. And that's useful, you know, all power to her. And credit to Yvette Cooper for asking those pertinent questions to Amber Rudd, which in a way did put the government on the line. But the idea that the fact that she can do forensic questioning would translate into being a Labour leader who would be 20 points ahead in the polls, I think misses what politics is actually about. I mean, Ed Miliband was quite good at asking pertinent questions in Parliament, but no one watches the Home Affairs Select Committee. Why Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell have some traction with the public. Obviously, they're not universally popular in any way or form, but they can inspire people. And one reason they can inspire people is because they're principled. And if you look at their historical record, I mean, in this particular occasion, they stood up in Parliament and opposed the immigration bill of 2014.
Which only 6 Labour MPs did?
Yeah, so they can say, we genuinely represent the opposite of what is going on in government right now. And to be honest, it's handy that there are people like Yvette Cooper in Parliament who are good at forensic questioning, because to be honest, she might be better than some of the Labour front bench at doing that. She's a real professional when it comes to the work of parliamentary opposition, whereas what Labour's current front bench are exceptionally good at is rousing speeches, inspiring people, having principles which mean you stand in solidarity throughout your whole life with people who are being oppressed. You know, they're actually more important characteristics for a politician. But I think there's nothing wrong with congratulating Yvette Cooper for that technical ability she showed. But if you use that to take away from the actual Shadow Home Secretary, who is BAME, and has spent her whole life fighting for migrant rights, you've kind of missed the point.
I'd agree with that. I think it's very fair. It can be both true that Diane Abbott has been integral to this, but also that Yvette Cooper's questioning really was the beginning of the end for Amber Rudd. We're going to move on to the council elections in a second, but before we do, we're going to cut to a video of Diane Abbott.
Oh, yeah.
This was from earlier on today, wasn't it?
No, this is from 2014.
Oh, no, sorry, yeah, different one. There was one doing the rounds. So let's cut to that. This is from 2014, where she was opposing the Immigration Act.
Has she given no thought to the effect that her measures designed to crack down on illegal immigrants might have on people who are British nationals but appear as if they might be immigrants?
A lot of thought.
We've given a very great deal of thought to how these particular measures that we're putting in will operate. And for those who have mistakenly received letters challenging them, I want to say apologise to them, and I want to say sorry to anyone who has confusion or anxiety felt as a result of this.
I mean, you couldn't have a clip which better predicts the current crisis that the Tory government are in than that question from Diane Abbott, which is saying, will the policies you're implementing affect people who are in fact British citizens? That's what happened. That was her reason for opposing the bill, and it transpired.
Well, there you go.
Not many people can say that.
That's true. And I think you're right. That's a big reason why Labour are where they are. So let's talk about the council elections. They're on Thursday. If you've not already registered to vote, I'm afraid it's too late. What you can still do is you can go to nearestmarginal.com. You can be involved in getting people out, particularly on the day. On the Thursday is when the vote is. Very, very useful exercise to get people out, make sure they vote the right way. I won't say which way that is. I mean, Labour, obviously. So
shit, you've broken our impartiality
rules.
God,
Ofcom are regular, but they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I wouldn't care anyway. Because it is Purdah, isn't it? Generally speaking, we couldn't say that on the radio, for instance.
Oh, because we're coming up into the election period.
Yeah.
So does that apply for the FM show now?
Yeah, because we're covered by Ofcom. It's on a broadcast on a FM frequency. This, however, is not. So, like I say, go to mynearestmarginal.com. Boot these bastards out. I can say that too. I can swear. My intuition is that if Labour win Wandsworth or Westminster, one of the W's, there's a lot of pressure on Theresa May to resign. And we've always, maybe we agree on this, the presumption has been Brexit Day is next March. A year after that, Theresa May would give way to a successor. Maybe 6 months, a year after that, she'd give way to a successor. They'd bed in for 6 months, have a honeymoon, and then there'd be another general election. What I was told by a Tory source a few weeks ago was actually she thinks she can win another election. She wants to do it again. That it was a bad election fought at the wrong time on the wrong set of issues, and that they were very unlucky.
It's bizarre to get into her psyche, because there was
amazing.
a long period where everyone was just feeling really sorry for her for having to do this job that she clearly hated at that point. Yeah. But she wants to carry on for 4 years and attempt another general election.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going to have happened in the meantime to make her suddenly a really good campaigner?
Yeah, but which is why I think if the Tories, they're looking at losing Barnet in North London, is on the edge. Westminster, Wandsworth, all on the edge. Trafford as well in Manchester, on the edge. I mean, if they lost all 4 of those, I would really expect her to go. Of course, that's not likely because they're all pretty evenly balanced right now.
It will. I mean, I think the issue is that it will depend on turnout, right? So in 2017, when the election result was a bit of a surprise compared to polls, that was because people were much more motivated to turn out than they had been previously. And that was because of a hatred of the Tory government and an excitement about making Jeremy Corbyn Prime Minister. It's very difficult to create that same kind of enthusiasm and urgency about council elections.
That said, lots of young people were registered to vote. We know that. I mean, that's one of the statistics we do know is true empirically. Turnout went up a little bit. It didn't go up as much as some people were predicting, especially amongst the young, but there was a significant increase in turnout. And those people are registered. They're registered for this time round. I do wonder if there's, especially in the major cities.
Also because voting is a habit, isn't it? People who voted at the last election tend to vote at the subsequent election.
Yeah, so I think in Wandsworth...
Subsequent, is that afterwards?
Subsequent, yeah. Wandsworth and Westminster in particular, I think that will make something of a difference. There's this great story in The Guardian today. We'll finish on this. If you can pull this up, Gary. About 100 London councillors having links to property developers. Can you go into this a bit, Michael? What does it mean? It looks terrible. It looks like a conflict of interest. It looks like, dare I say it, corruption.
Headline, it's both of those things, Aaron.
All of the above.
It's a conflict of interest, and it looks very close to corruption. So, I mean, we've known that this has been going on in councils across the country. I mean, obviously, it is a part-time job. Well, actually, no, once you're in cabinet, it's a full-time job. So there isn't really any excuses to be taking money on the side from property developers. I mean, I don't think there would be anyway. But these are people who are giving out or voting on whether particular development should get planning permission. They're the ones who, when a property developer says, oh, we can't build 35% social housing because it won't be profitable to us, when the council rolls over and says, oh, okay, fine, okay, build 10%. If that councillor is also on the payroll for that developing country, that looks very, very bad.
And also there was 43 councillors work for communications consultancy, so PR, basically PR, specialising in planning, which are appointed by developers to communicate with local residents, pressure groups and councillors before planning hearings. So you've got 43 councillors whose job is literally propaganda and public relations to sell people the reasons why developments should be happening. And clearly developers, the primary objective for them is profit. It's to get as big a margin and big as return as possible. Fine, that's what private business does. But as we've said, that's a clear conflict of interest. 43 councillors, and particularly interesting is in Wandsworth, one of those councils which appears to be on the brink of going Labour, which has 17 councillors who declared interest or entertainment with property companies, where 19% of new homes built between 2013 and 2016 were affordable. So you've got a Tory council, a large number of councillors, I think, which have a clear conflict of interest and a very, very, very low level of new affordable homes. Is there enough time between now and Thursday, do you think, to impress this idea into the public consciousness about actually councils are really important in building affordable housing? One of the few things they can do, right, in building affordable housing, making sure that people can at least rent in areas where they've been brought up or where they're living?
I mean, I think that'll depend a lot on campaigning. So I was out in Wandsworth actually on Saturday, and that was the easiest way in a conversation, partly because it was the thing I kind of understand. But when people say, why should I vote Labour? It's the idea that the Tory councillors, they roll over at any demand that a property developer has. And if you vote a Labour council in, they will play hardball. And that means that developers won't be able to screw the community fundamentally. So I think it was a council in North London, I can't remember exactly which one, but they won a High Court case.
Was it in Islington, Finsbury?
Yeah, I think it was, potentially,
yeah.
Which was to say that property developers couldn't get out of their commitments to social housing because they overspent on the land. So if you pay too much for the land, you can't say, oh, well, we spent too much on the land, it's no longer profitable for us to make it if we have 35% affordable. Councils are now allowed to say, no, that was your contract, you can't break it. So where there are Labour councils with the will, it seems like progress can be made. And I mean, it's a shame because this is what Labour should have been banging on about for the last 2 months. But for various reasons, they've been tied up in other crises.
So were you going around Wandsworth on Saturday going, they're terrific negotiators. They get the best deals.
They get the best deals.
They get the best deals. Was that
exactly
what you were saying? It's a good frame, actually.
Well, because you're quite high up on the tower blocks as well, so you can point to what's it called, Battersea Power Station.
Yeah,
where I think there's like 9% affordable. And yeah,
I'm surprised it's that high, to be frank.
It is because it's also very clear, right? If you are a Tory government, you will just Tory council, you will just roll over. To be honest, a lot of these councillors who are in hock with developers are Labour councillors, which is why it's also important to get involved in the next round of selections.
Yeah, because although you can't reselect MPs, and if you actually say this, if you dare to say this on Twitter, it's tantamount to abuse, we are allowed to reselect councillors. And we have been since the 1980s. And guess why? Because local councils used to be very left-wing. And the right to get rid of left-wing councillors wanted reselection. I happen to think it's a good thing, reselection. But now we have a right-wing parliamentary Labour Party. They don't want the same thing for MPs. And if, like I say, you dare voice that preference, you're an abusive personality who has no place in a kinder, gentler politics. So I think that's pretty much all for today, isn't it?
Let's do 2 minutes for questions. I've got a quiz question as well.
Yeah.
So Robert Davis, who was deputy leader in charge of planning at Westminster Council until news of the amount of times he'd been entertained by property developers broke, but he's still standing for council, so he's not completely withdrawn from the political sphere. How many times was he entertained by property developers between 2013 and 2016 over 3 years?
3 years, busy guy. I assume he has a family, has a job on the side. He probably just met them a couple of times, right? 2 or 3.
A couple of times?
Yeah.
Fisherman Fred's gone for 188. It's quite close, actually. Any more questions?
Over 36 months. So how many is it?
Over 3 years,
Yeah.
over 36 months, 69, 420. There aren't that many days, mate. 911, there aren't that many days. 150. So that's on average 3 dinners every 2 weeks.
That's terrific, isn't it?
And he was director of planning. You know, this isn't just some like cheeky oddball councillor in the corner. This is deputy leader,
like
director of planning.
brazen
Yeah.
corruption for me. Where and he's in Wandsworth, is it?
He was in Westminster.
Westminster, yes, it was one.
I
Of the
mean, he
top-
still is in Westminster,
Yeah.
but he's lost that particular brief.
So let's get some more questions. A couple of questions. We'll round up in a couple of minutes. Michael, do you want to read them out?
John Woodcock, thoughts?
Oh, so John Woodcock has been suspended today because there's an ongoing inquiry, a party investigation, as I understand it. I don't know if there's a criminal one, in regards to alleged sexual assault. And I would say, this is nothing to crow about. Sexual assault exists across society. I think it transcends political parties, ideology, etc. And I would say that, dragging this stuff into the media prejudices justice. And actually, it's very important that this shambles that we saw in regard to Mark Wadsworth recently, where people were openly intimidating and harassing character references, potential witnesses, this is no way to carry on. And in that instance, it was being done by the right against, a left-wing activist. But I would still say the same here. It's very important that justice is done. You need to have faith in due process and the processes of accountability the party has, the law. If they don't work, sure, we can criticise it afterwards. But for now, I really think it's important to lay off. I don't agree with John Woodcock. I don't think he should be a Labour MP. Nonetheless, I believe in equality under the law, and due process. So that's my thoughts.
You don't
Yourself?
have to hold off on all the other things that are wrong with John Woodcock.
Oh,
I agree with you about due process.
He's a disgusting politician. But I mean, that's immaterial, isn't it? I mean, that's immaterial to whether or not he's done what he's alleged to have done. I mean, I've been calling him Jihadi John or Erdogan John because he's so close to the Turkish government of Erdogan. I mean, that is immaterial in regard to this.
I think one thing that's notable is that people keep saying anti-Corbyn MP suspended by Jenny Formby as if sort of like this
That's
is
quite
a vendetta
gross, isn't it?
on her part, but that's completely gross. And also sort of like I think we are seeing less outrage about him because he's a centrist and it's seen as less damaging to Corbyn.
Oh, clearly, no, we can talk about the media reception. Clearly we can talk about the media reception because it's very important because we're seeing potential miscarriages of justice elsewhere on the basis of this. And I'm talking in regards to the Mark Wadsworth thing. You can't go around harassing people, intimidating people on social media, saying they can't be character references. Everybody has the right to a character reference, whether it's a driving offence or whether you've done something which is terrible. So, yeah, no, I'd agree with that. But the idea as well that Jenny Formby, I got a tweet, somebody said, they challenged me saying, oh, it's so close to local elections. Why now? I mean, you have to be a really screwed up person to think that. Really screwed up.
Okay, 2 last questions. So one is thoughts on Mark Wadsworth, and then, because lots of people are asking that, and then the final one is going to be book recommendations.
Oh, book recommendations in regard to what?
I think you just said book recommendations.
Ask them to clarify. And
If the person who said book recommendations be more specific.
Yeah.
While we talk about
I read
Mark
a lot of
Wadsworth.
books. Great genes. No, so Mark Wadsworth, what are your thoughts?
I think that the way it was handled and the fact that there was a lot of trial by media and also that the media was sort of very uncritically reporting it as if he was on trial for being anti-Semitic was incredibly irresponsible. And I'd be very upset about that if I was him. I think the particular incident that he was being disciplined for was unfortunate. I think if you're attending a press event about an anti-Semitism report, it's not an appropriate moment to attack an MP. I think the question he asked and the words he said weren't anti-Semitic. I think the idea that he was spouting some sort of conspiracy theory is a real stretch. I think him saying that an MP was working hand in hand with the Telegraph because they'd handed Ruth Smeeth a press release is not an anti-Semitic thing to say, but I do see how that was an insensitive way to operate in what was clearly going to be a highly charged media event.
Wrong time, wrong place.
Wrong time, wrong place.
So potentially he's guilty, but what about the sentence?
Well, so for me, that's a mistake that is definitely on its own not worthy of being expelled from a political party.
Yeah, there's no history with him, right?
Well, that's what the thing I don't know about is the thing I haven't looked into properly is how he behaved afterwards.
Yeah.
So I think if you do something which was a bit insensitive, it wasn't anti-Semitic, a bit like Jackie Walker at the Jewish Labour Movement meeting. It's not anti-Semitic, but it is a bit insensitive. And I think if your response afterwards is to say, sorry, yeah, that was a bit insensitive, but I also raised a legitimate, because he also did raise a legitimate question about the fact that there weren't many brown people in the room, which was 100% a legitimate question
black
to
people.
ask
Wholly
at a report on anti-Semitism and other forms of racism. But if you double down and sort of say, like, if you don't give any leeway or any sense that you might have done something wrong, then I can see why the disciplinary process gets a little bit tougher. I actually don't know enough to know what happened in between that event and the particular
because he was
ruling.
involved in some of the Labour against the witch hunt stuff, right?
Well, that's what I've heard, and they seem like a particularly unhelpful organisation.
Yeah. But the incident, I mean, if the incident in and of itself was the only thing we were talking about, clearly, I mean, maybe suspend the guy for a week. I mean, clearly you shouldn't be expelled on the basis of that. I mean, that's just preposterous.
I think it's also clear that the process, the Labour Party were under a lot of pressure, a lot of political pressure to expel him, because they knew that if they didn't, it would be another huge round of media furore by journalists and political opponents who weren't particularly interested in due process.
Can I just say, we're going to move on to the books thing as the final thing. We were seeing, there was a former Labour staffer who wrote a letter saying that Chris Williamson had brought the party into disrepute. This was published by the Huffington Post. This was published by Paul Waugh, tweeted it. And you think, this is this isn't even journalism. It's completely irresponsible. What are you doing? What, for a couple of hundred likes, you're going to engage in this defamatory nonsense? You cannot intimidate people from being, character references. Disgusting. Anyway, last question. Was there any clarification in regard to the books?
Check.
Otherwise, I'll start talking about, Mills and Boon. Romantic novels. 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh, there's just loads of book recommendations in there now. I can't see any clarification.
Okay, well, I'll give my top 3 books. You give your top 3 books very quick.
Ever,
Michael.
Wow.
Shall I start?
Yeah, go on.
Okay. Okay. No, that's a silly thing. I'll just say 3 books. So first would be, I say, Marx's Capital. Very important book. Also very long and very turgid. So
That's my opposition to it.
Yeah. So my recommendation would be to go to the David Harvey lectures. These are all online. They're video lectures. Read the David Harvey Companion to Marx's Capital. It's a book out with Verso in 2010. Read the book and watch the video lectures together. You can do this. He outlines what you should be doing. And then try and read Capital. Okay? And actually, I always say, if you read the first 2 chapters of Capital, you understand a hell of a lot about Marx's political economy. 2 chapters. Very difficult chapters, but, I mean, it's not much, right? So those are 2 books, I guess. David Harvey's Companion to Marx's Capital and Capital, or A Critique of Political Economy, as it's called. That's 2 books. Another book. I would instead recommend an author. I would say Andre Gors, who wrote a number of books in the 1970s and 1980s. He was kind of one of the sort of avant-garde voices of the New Left, heterodox Marxist. He wrote a book called Goodbye to the Working Class. He wrote a book called A Critique of Economic Reason. He wrote a book called Ecologica. All very, very good books. So Andre Gors, go check him out. Very important thinker. Actually, very easy to read as well.
Great.
And you?
I'm not going to go for like best books ever, but the 2 books I'm reading at the moment and finding very useful. One is called Politics Against Markets by Gösta Esping Anderson, which is about the possibility of creating socialism via a process of reform. The key argument, which I really like, is the idea that a reform is socialist so long as the consequences of it are greater unity among the working class. So it's sort of like it's very different to sort of like the progress Blairite concept of policy, where they say They do a sort of quantitative analysis of how it redistributes money across every different percentile of the population. Whereas this is saying, does it institutionalize solidarity? And will it create a future constituency for social democratic government?
There was a greater emphasis on universality, universal
There's a
benefits.
great emphasis on universality, but there's also some interesting things about sort of like national wage bargaining that was involved in the Swedish model.
Anything else?
Przeworski, which is capitalism and social democracy, which is sort of a slightly more, pessimistic idea about the possibility of reform. So he's saying, the moment you try and do a really radical reform, even if that is on this basis of like you want to create solidarity, if you get real opposition from business, if you're trying to reform capitalism, they have a veto. So it's sort of like, it's quite reasonable. There is a business veto when you try and do reform within capitalism. It's a very difficult question to answer, which this other one doesn't answer. On a completely different topic, I'd go for Jay McAlevey, which is just like essentially really readable. We've had her on the show before about building power, super engaging, and I think really gives you a framework of what good activism looks like.
She's an amazing woman.
Yeah.
She sleeps like 2 hours a night.
Very high energy.
High energy. She had a lot of energy, right?
Yeah, an amazing amount of energy.
A very impressive woman.
4 hours. You said she sleeps 4 hours a night and then sort of 10 on a Sunday.
No, I think it wasn't 4 hours a night. She said to me 2. I think, no, maybe she had 2 the night she met us, right? Because she had on a Monday, she takes like a sleeping pill on the Sunday and sleeps like 10 hours. And it's like, that does me for the week.
I'm always jealous of people like that. I'm a bit of a sleeper.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you'll get older and be careful what you wish for, huh? Because I got very good during my PhD at not sleeping. And then for about a year afterwards, I couldn't sleep. So, you know.
All right, I think Gary's going to cut us off soon. So we'll... No?
Well, before Gary does cut us off, if you've liked watching this, hit the subscribe button. Hit the little bell button, little notifications button, because you can see us going live when we do. We want to do more live video at Novara Media because Facebook changed their algorithm. So that's very important.
But I do prefer it. We prefer it.
This is much better. It's a much nicer platform. So, yes, that would be very useful. Also, go to support.novaramedia.com, help us build a new media for different politics. Give us some cash. We were in the FT this weekend. I thought it was a very interesting write-up. Clearly something strange is happening where the likes of Jim Pickard and Lionel Barber are starting to take us and our politics seriously. So, yeah, help us bring that even further forward because this is hopefully just the start.
You also just got the live cam of the editors that came up on screen. And not only did you see Gary and Georgia, 2 of our editors, you saw Gary's dad. Say hi to Gary's dad.
For some of the commenters, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I know.
For all of you who were complaining about him on sound last week, Gary's dad says lay off.
Or he'll come round.
Yeah.
On that note, we'll be back, not Thursday, Monday.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, I don't know. We'll decide in the week. I mean, because there's election day on Thursday, isn't there? So I don't know if we'll be campaigning or maybe...
I'm gonna be in Malta.
Oh, you're going to be in Malta? All right, next Monday then.
So yeah, next Monday. We'll be assessing what's going on. It could be the case that Theresa May is on the way out. We don't know.
Let's hope we have Wandsworth. Oh, go campaign. If you live in London, I recommend Wandsworth. I'll be there all day on Thursday.
Cool. See you next week.